Have you ever felt like you were in a stretch of time when you thought, I don't feel like myself? Maybe you were less patient than usual. Maybe you were, I don't know, more withdrawn. Or maybe just the ordinary noise was feeling louder to you. Questions were feeling heavier. Decisions felt harder. Conversations that you were having, right? Like they were feeling like work. Um, this is a real one, right? Like maybe your sense of humor, right, just wasn't available to you. Maybe you didn't want to be touched, interrupted, asked for anything, especially not expected to explain yourself. Now, perhaps you were not deeply sad or, something huge like that. Maybe you were not even experiencing something dramatic or in the midst of an emotional crisis. You were simply slower, feeling kind of flatter, foggier, and less available to your regular version of yourself, right? So I'm guessing that you maybe started judging that version of yourself, and it might have sounded something like, God, why am I so irritable? Or why am I so unmotivated? Why am I avoiding people? Why am I reacting so strongly to things that feel so little? Why can't I get myself together? Why don't I feel like me? And of course, sometimes the answer is emotional, and sometimes it's relational, and other times it's just situational. But sometimes your body is carrying far more of your story than you realize. And so that's where I want to begin this week. The first week of August, 2026, right? Doesn't matter when you're watching. But as we're moving into August here, and we're talking about authenticity without apology, showing up more honestly and more congruently across the environments that shape our lives. Right? But here's the deal. We can't have an honest conversation about how you show up without also talking about the physical condition that you are showing up from. Because your emotional life is not floating above your body like some separate entity, right? Your patience lives in your body. Your attention lives in your body. Your ability to pause lives in your body. Your ability to tolerate noise, disagreement, social interactions, uncertainty, feedback, pressure, and even other people's emotions. All of that lives in your body. And so when a body is inflamed, exhausted, undernourished, uncomfortable, sleep deprived, overloaded, right? That access to those capabilities typically does, become a lot harder for you. And so that doesn't mean that inflammation turns you into some other person, right? It means physiological strain can change what is readily available to you. So I'll give you some technical stuff here, right? The research on immune to brain communication, right, has absolutely shown significant systemic inflammation does in fact affect mood. It affects motivation. It affects cognition, energy, and even social behavior, right? Sometimes, well, scientists, right, sometimes use the term sickness behavior, right, to describe the cluster of fatigue, reduced motivation, withdrawal, changes in appetite, lower pleasure, and cognitive slowing that can occur during an immune response. Okay, so I want you to think about the last time you had the flu or some other significant infection, right? You probably didn't feel highly social, right? You were likely not eager to host people, to solve complex problems, to give somebody a patient explanation, or have a vulnerable conversation, right? Like your system was redirecting your resources. And that is adaptive when you are actually ill. The problem is that many people experience lower level physical strain, poor sleep, ongoing pain, digestive discomfort, inflammatory illness, inadequate intake, medication effects, hormonal shifts, chronic stress, or a combination of several things. And then what happens is they start judging the resulting behavior as though it's purely a character problem, right? Like they say, oh, I am lazy, I'm difficult, I'm antisocial, I'm too sensitive, I have no discipline, I'm becoming negative, and I'm not emotionally involved enough. And sure, maybe, but before you reduce the entire experience to a personality flaw, right? Like, I want you guys to start asking yourself, what condition is my body operating under? Because that is so much more of an intelligent question to ask yourself. So, what do we actually mean by inflammation? With me? Inflammation, right, is a part of the immune system's response to injury, infection, or even a perceived threat. Okay, so acute inflammation is necessary, right? Like you cut off your finger, develop an infection, strain a muscle, right? Inflammatory activity helps coordinate protection and repair. So inflammation is not inherently bad. The body is not betraying you simply because inflammation exists. The concern we need to be having is context, intensity, duration, and the actual cause. Yeah? So inflammation, right, can be driven by a lot of things. It can be driven by a medical condition, infection, autoimmune activity, injury, a metabolic dysfunction, smoking, inadequate sleep, chronic psychological stress, and so many other factors. So it should not be treated as just one vague diagnosis explaining every unpleasant symptom that you have. And this is where I find that online wellness culture, right, often gets a little bit reckless, right? People are told that every headache, every mood shift, every pound, every digestive sensation, and every bad day is quote unquote inflammation. And that's not precise. Absolutely, inflammation is real, but it's not a catch-all explanation, okay? You also cannot reliably diagnose, right, systemic inflammation simply because you feel puffy, tired, irritable, or even foggy, okay? Those symptoms have so many different causes, right? But what we can say is that inflammatory activity and our emotional functioning influence one another, right? Got heart-brain axis, right? So they're influencing one another in complex and sometimes bidirectional ways. Okay, so research has found associations between poorer emotion regulation and higher inflammatory markers in many, but not all, right? And not all of the studies. I want to make sure I clarify that. And the direction of influence that they find, right, is not always simple. So the conversation that we want to be having is not inflammation causes every emotional problem. We want the conversation to look like, sound like, be like the condition of your body can affect the amount of emotional and cognitive capacity that you have available, right? So that's useful truth. Now, physical load changes our emotional bandwidth. Okay, so I use the phrase emotional bandwidth because most people understand that immediately. When you have bandwidth, you can pause, you can reflect, you can stay curious, you can hear someone else's perspective, you can choose your own tone of voice, you can tolerate uncertainty, you can make decisions, explain something with patience, remain socially available, notice your own internal state before reacting. So when bandwidth is low, right, even small demands feel truly expensive, right? A text that normally wouldn't bother you feels super intrusive. A question feels like pressure to perform. A request feels like a personal attack or criticism. A change in plans, right, can feel super overwhelming. Someone chewing loudly feels personally offensive, right? A mildly complicated task can begin to feel impossible. And you may find yourself in these types of situations becoming shorter, quieter, more reactive, more controlling, more avoidant, more tearful. I see that one a lot. More defensive, a whole lot less flexible, less tolerant, especially of interruption, right? And less interested in social contact. So that doesn't excuse harmful behavior. Your physical condition may explain, however, why regulation is harder, but it doesn't make other people responsible for absorbing whatever comes out of you, right? This is still a self-leadership conversation, my friend. But good self-leadership begins with accurate information, and accurate information includes our bodies, right? I get it, right? Physical discomfort, right? We got to talk about it because it makes the world feel so much more demanding. And when you're experiencing pain, nausea, bloating, reflux, bowel urgency, constipation, headaches, body aches, or significant fatigue, part of your attention is already occupied. So even when you're functioning, and even when nobody else can see what's going on inside of you, or even when you're still working, driving, attending meetings, teaching, parenting, cooking, carrying on with, an otherwise normal day, a portion of you is managing the body, right? You're monitoring. How far am I from a bathroom? Can I eat this? Is it going to make me feel worse? Can I sit comfortably? Am I going to get a migraine? How much longer do I have to be here? Do I have enough energy to get all the way home? Can I hide how uncomfortable I truly am, right? That monitoring, right? It costs us something. And because the discomfort is often invisible, right? Shut it down, hide it, right? The people around you most likely don't understand why you're less available. In fact, you may not understand it yourself. So instead of saying to yourself, my body's uncomfortable and my capacity is lower, which is what I would prefer you say, right? You're out there saying, look, people are irritating me today. Sometimes people are irritating, but sometimes your threshold has just changed. And you got to be able to make that distinction because it matters. Now, we have to talk about sleep because it's part of, I don't know, should be every conversation, because poor sleep deserves a level of special attention because it honestly affects nearly every part of our emotional functioning. Sleep loss has been associated with changes in mood, emotional reactivity, attention, and the brain systems involved in responding to emotional information. Experimental sleep restrictive studies have also found greater responsiveness to negative emotional cues and changes in communication between brain regions involved in emotional processing and regulation, right? So you don't need a brain scan to recognize this. Most people know they're not quite the same after several poor nights of sleep, right? They notice that they become less patient, more negative, more anxious, more impulsive, more emotionally flat, more easily overwhelmed, right? More likely to misread somebody else's tone, less able to find the right words. And here's where this connects to authenticity. Okay. When you're exhausted, you may not have enough capacity, right, to show up honestly, right? So you're out there performing, right? You say you're fine because explaining feels like way too much work. You agree because conflict is going to require way too much energy that you just don't have. You withdraw because conversations feel just really expensive, right? Ugh. You become overly controlled because you're afraid that if you begin talking, too much is going to come out. You may look inauthentic when what you actually are is depleted. Again, that doesn't mean depletion explains every pattern, but this is information worth using. Okay. Now, this is psychonutrition, right? So yes, we're going to talk about food because food is involved, but we need to be careful, right? So we're not going to blame every mood state on one food, one ingredient, one meal, or one blood sugar spike. Okay. The relationship between eating patterns, glucose changes, mood, and cognition is affected by individual health status, right? Diabetes, medication, your meal composition, sleep, stress, and a whole lot of other variables. And in fact, research examining glucose variability and mood has quite honestly produced mixed findings, particularly in adults with diabetes, which is exactly why sweeping claims that we find out there in the world, right, should be absolutely avoided, right? So what we can say more responsibly is this, okay? If you are not eating enough, going very long periods without food, consuming meals that leave you physically uncomfortable, right? Relying heavily on caffeine, or repeatedly eating in ways that you know do not work well for your individual body. You may notice changes in energy, concentration, patience, and emotional steadiness. Okay, that experience is real, even when the mechanism is not identical for every person. And this is why I don't believe in handing everyone the same anti-inflammatory food list. Your body is not a generic template. Right? Where one person thrives on a large raw salad, another person, right, experiences hours, if not days, of distension, pain, and complete digestive shutdown. Okay, from that one raw salad. One person who feels wonderful eating legumes. Another person, right, has gastrointestinal conditions that make them difficult to tolerate. One person does well with 3 large meals. And another, right, functions far better with smaller, more frequent nourishment. Another one I think is important to bring up, right? Like one person can tolerate broad Mediterranean style patterns. Everybody talks about them, right? But another needs substantial medical and nutritional modifications because of allergies, gastroparesis, inflammatory bowel disease, kidney disease, diabetes, an eating disorder history, or medication interactions, right? And I fit into some of these, and I know some of you do as well, right? So the goal is not to follow the cleanest looking food plan on the internet. The goal is to be interested enough to understand what supports your ability to function. Okay. The difference between support and control, I think, is important for anyone, especially with a history of rigid dieting, anorexia, orthorexia, binge restricting cycles, or body dysmorphia, right? Because an inflammation conversation can become another socially accepted way to fear food. And then suddenly everything becomes toxic, right? Seed oils are toxic. Sugar is toxic. Gluten is toxic. Dairy is toxic. Carbohydrates are toxic. Processed food is toxic. Eating outside your home is toxic. And before long, right, that person is not calmer or healthier, right? They're terrified. They're terrified from what they're hearing. Socially restricted, nutritionally limited, and thinking about food all day. And my friend, that is not wellness. That's a loss of freedom. Just wearing some wellness outfit, right? So our goal is not to control every bite. It is to gather useful data and information for ourselves, for our body, for our mind, for our hearts, for our souls, right? What foods feel supportive? What foods regularly leave me uncomfortable? What quantities work best? What meal timing helps me function? Which patterns affect my sleep? What happens inside of me when I undereat? What happens when I eat too much all at once? What happens when I rely on caffeine instead of nourishment? Here's a favorite. What happens when I drink alcohol? What patterns are consistent enough to actually matter? That is observation. And observation will give you choices. And your fear will remove those choices. Now, let's bring it back, right? Like, let's talk about how inflammation and discomfort can actually affect our authenticity, right? It's what we're focusing on this week, right? Hopefully you watched the video that came out yesterday. But that video yesterday was teaching us that this week asks, where do you edit yourself in different rooms? And this psychonutrition is adding another question. Okay. And that's, where do you edit yourself because you do not physically feel well enough to show up fully? Maybe you hide your fatigue because you don't want to look weak. Maybe you pretend you are comfortable because you don't want to be difficult. Maybe you eat something you know doesn't work for you because you don't want attention drawn to your needs. Maybe you stay longer than your body can reasonably tolerate because you don't want to disappoint anybody. Maybe you become quiet in meetings because your brain feels foggy and you're afraid. You're afraid you're going to lose your words. Maybe you become overly polished because you're using every available resource to appear functional. Maybe you become controlling about the environment because your body is already feeling unpredictable. And you know what? Maybe you disappear socially because you just don't want anyone to see how depleted you feel. Okay? This is self-editing too. And I don't think the answer is to announce every symptom in every room, right? Like, we don't all walk in and say, hey, I'm feeling bloated and gassy today, but I'm here anyway, right? Authenticity doesn't mean everybody receives full access to your medical or physical reality. It means you stop lying to yourself about the condition you are in. It means that you can say to yourself, I have less capacity today. I need to eat before I go. I need to make this visit shorter. I can't tolerate that kind of food. Well, I'm not available tonight. I need more time to think. I'm physically uncomfortable and I don't want to make an important decision from this state of being. And that's not weakness, right? That is congruence. So this week, I want you to begin observing, not obsessing, but observing the relationship that you have between your physical state and how you show up. Okay? I want you asking yourself, when do I feel most emotionally available? Right? When do I feel the most emotionally available? Is it after a good night's sleep? Is it after eating enough of the right things? Right? Is it after movement? Is it when your digestion is calm? Is it at a particular time of day? Right? Then I want you asking yourself, when do I become more edited? Maybe it's when I'm hungry, when I'm bloated, when I'm in pain, after alcohol, after several poor nights of sleep, when I've had far too much caffeine? Is it after an overly large meal? Is it when I'm constipated or nauseated? Right? Then I want you asking, what version of me appears when my body is overloaded? Okay. So this looks like, do I become withdrawn? Is my tone sharp? Am I anxious? Am I getting controlling? Am I super quiet? Am I overly performative? Overly agreeable? I feel emotionally flat and less tolerant of people. And then you have to look at, what do I need in those moments? You got to ask yourself that question. What do I need in those moments? And it might mean you got to test it, but check it out, man. Is it food? Is it water? Is it rest? Do I think I need a medical evaluation? Do I just need less stimulation? Maybe a smaller commitment? Perhaps just a direct sentence or better boundary, but backed by healthier limits and limitations. The creation of time before I have to respond, right? The point is, my friend, not to build a new excuse, right? The point is to build a more accurate operating manual for you. Okay, so there's no single universal anti-inflammatory menu, but there are several sensible foundations that most people can discuss with their healthcare team. Give me a call, right? A professional that can adapt to their medical needs. Now, let me say that again, right? Like if it's a medical need, and you need to discuss it with your healthcare team, great. But if we're talking about starting this observation process because I'm not sure, and I want to feel emotionally more connected, et cetera, and change some of the patterns that we've been talking about here today, right? Like I am a psychonutrition consultant, and I'm happy to get you started and help you discern whether you need a medical team or whether you need to just change the relationship that you have with yourself when it comes to your physical body and your dietary practices so that you can have total emotional performance. Anyway, eating sufficiently, right? Chronically underfueling your body, right, is not a calming strategy. Okay. I know a lot of you do this, right? You underfuel. So you can't consistently ask your body for things like concentration, patience, movement, hormonal function, tissue repair, and emotion regulation while refusing to provide adequate energy. Right? You cannot heal without fuel. Eating clean is not enough if you're not eating enough. Bottom line. We've got to build meals around tolerated nourishment, right? So think in terms of what your body can digest and use. A tolerated protein source, a tolerated carbohydrate or energy source, fats in amounts that work for your digestion, fruits, vegetables, herbs, and other plant foods, right? That you personally tolerate. I'm here to tell you, ginger isn't anti-inflammatory for everybody. And I'm first in line of people that I've worked with, right? That knows that to be true, right? But anyway, right? Sufficient fluids. You got to have that. And it shouldn't be what looks impressive. It should be what works for you, right? We got to avoid arriving at our demanding moments in our lives from a state of depletion, right? So before a long meeting, before a family event, before an appointment of any kind, before, I don't know, for some of you, right? Like a teaching session or an emotionally charged conversation, you need you to make sure you have eaten and hydrated appropriately for your body. Don't enter every important room running on coffee, adrenaline, and moral superiority about skipping lunch, right? That's not high performance. I hear this all the time, right? Like, I have coffee and maybe a protein shake in the morning, and then I work through lunch and push through till night, right? Like, that's not high performance. You gotta do better and respect digestion, right? Like, a food can be nutritionally valuable and still be a super poor choice for your individual gastrointestinal system, right? So if it repeatedly is causing you significant pain, distension, urgency, reflux, prolonged fullness, right? Like, oh, that matters. Let's have a conversation about persistent symptoms, right? Either with me or with somebody else, right? Because I don't want you slipping into that endless cycle of just eliminating foods on your own, right? We want to do this with intention, with purpose, with understanding as to why or why not, or, oh, let's test this, right? Then you got to protect your sleep. Nutrition can't compensate for chronic sleep loss. You cannot out supplement 4 hours of sleep. So watch your patterns involving alcohol also, right? Because alcohol affects your sleep quality, appetite, hydration, digestion, mood. Most people don't realize that alcohol is a direct contributor to the next day being fueled with anxiety and depressive states, right? But it's also going to affect medication safety and just all around next day functioning, right? You don't need to moralize it to observe it. Okay. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't drink. I'm telling you should know what it's doing to your body. Right. So paying attention for 72 hours following is a good guideline. And then we got to be careful with our caffeine, right? It's gonna improve our alertness temporarily, but more is not always better, particularly if it worsens or exacerbates your anxiety, reflux, appetite suppression, heart symptoms, and, well, obvious, right? Like your sleep. So your goal is not maximum stimulation, it's usable energy. So what this does not mean, my friend, and I want to be clear about what I'm not saying. Okay. I'm not saying sorry about that. what I'm not saying is I'm not saying your emotional patterns are caused by food. Okay. I'm not saying that inflammation explains every difficult mood. I'm not saying that you can eat your way out of trauma, grief, relationship dysfunction, depression, anxiety, or medical conditions. And I'm not saying everyone needs an elimination diet. I'm also not saying that there's one anti-inflammatory ingredient that will fix you. And I'm definitely not saying that you should stop prescribed medications and try to replace medical treatment with a new grocery list. Okay? Not saying any of that. Nutrition can support capacity for you. It does not replace emotional work. It does not replace healthy boundaries, limits, and limitations. It does not replace effective communication. It does not replace the potential need for a medical evaluation. And it doesn't replace treatment when treatment is needed. Your identity is so much bigger than your current state. So I want to close with this, right? A low capacity version of you is still you, right? So the irritable version, the tired version, the foggy version, the version who doesn't want to talk, the version who needs more space, the version that can't access their normal optimism or flexibility, right? You don't have to shame those versions of yourself. But what you want to do is lead those versions to understand what's happening, to communicate with yourself more accurately. You need to stop forcing yourself to perform normally when your body is clearly asking you for better support. And you need to avoid making permanent conclusions about your character from a temporary or even treatable physical state. Right? You may not be losing yourself. Right? Perhaps you're overloaded, inflamed, maybe sleep deprived, you may be undernourished, you may be in pain, you may need medical support, you may need a quieter day, you may need to stop asking your body to function as though it has no limits. And that's not making excuses, that's becoming more precise. So this week, ask yourself, when do I feel most like myself physically? When does my body make congruence harder? What patterns reduce my emotional bandwidth? What support helps more of me become available again? Because authenticity is not only about having the courage to tell the truth. Sometimes, right, it begins with being honest about the condition that your body is in. And so honoring that truth before you walk into the next room, right? So thank you for sticking with me this long. I realize not my videos on this topic are generally a little bit shorter, but I thought, there's some really important things to take a look at this month. So this psychonutrition can be found inside of the work that we do inside Total Emotional Performance, right? So it's not food as punishment. It's not food as perfection. Excuse me. It's not food as the answer to everything, right? Food, sleep, physical care, emotional work, and self-leadership working together to help you become more available to choice. That's what this is all about. And I'll see you in the next video.